Okay, so today we're diving into a really, really dark chapter, the Cleveland torso murders.
Yeah.
It happened in Cleveland, Ohio, back in the 1930s, and it's a story that just, it grabs you
Right.
and won't let go. And we're gonna go through, the history behind it, and talk about the victims and this place called Kingsbury Run.
Yeah.
And of course, no discussion of the Cleveland torso murders would be complete without talking about Eliot Ness.
Of course.
And then we'll wrap up by talking about what's being done now to try and solve the mystery of the ones that we still haven't identified.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. So,
And the thing is, to really understand this whole story, you almost have to put yourself back in time.
right.
To the Great Depression.
Yeah.
Because, things were so desperate back then.
Right.
So many people were out of work.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people just disappeared.
Yeah.
They were traveling around the country looking for work, living in these, Hoovervilles.
Right.
And so, if somebody disappeared, nobody really noticed.
Yeah.
It's easy to just become another statistic.
Yeah, and sadly that made those folks very vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes this story so hard.
Yeah.
No?
Right.
But speaking of a place that played a really big role in all of this, can you tell us a little bit about Kingsbury Run?
Kingsbury Run, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's this ravine,
Okay.
carved out by an ancient river.
Okay.
So it was very isolated,
Right?
and it became like a refuge for the homeless.
Right, a hobo jungle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sadly, that made it a perfect place to get rid of bodies.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it was secluded and close to the railroads.
Right next to the train tracks and the Cuyahoga River.
Yeah. So, I guess we should talk about, how all this really started, and people point to the Lady of the Lake.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about her.
Yeah, so back in 1934, even before all the other murders started, they found part of a woman's body along the shore of Lake Erie.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that they had used some kind of chemical preservative on her skin.
Sure.
And it gave it this really strange look, like leathery and red. And that same thing would show up in other victims later.
Oh, wow.
So it really makes you think that she was, like patient zero or victim zero for
Yeah.
this whole thing.
So then it was September 1935 when things really took a turn with the two bodies they found in Kingsbury Run.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so they found Edward Andrassy.
Okay.
He was a former hospital orderly who had fallen on hard times.
Okay.
He'd been emasculated and had rope burns.
Oh, gosh.
And they found him right next to John Doe,
Okay.
who was this unidentified white male.
Okay.
His body had been burned and saturated with oil.
Oh, wow.
And he also had that same leathery looking skin,
Okay.
like the Lady of the Lake.
Yeah.
So it was like a calling card almost.
Yeah, so, just a few months after that, in January of 36, the case of Florence Polio came up.
Right.
And that's got its own kind of controversy around it.
Yeah, that one's really strange.
So tell us about that.
Well, they found her remains near East 20th Street, all chopped up,
Oh, my gosh.
And they were hidden in baskets, but they never found her head.
Ah,
They identified her as a waitress through fingerprints.
okay.
But here's the thing. This guy, Frank Dolezal,
Okay.
he was a butcher,
Okay.
and he actually confessed to the murder.
Oh.
But then he recanted his confession,
Oh.
and then he died in jail.
Oh,
So it just
Lord.
leaves so many unanswered questions.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Did they ever find out what happened to her head?
No, they never did.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
So, then we have, one that has really stuck with people, the tattooed man.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about him.
So this was June of 36.
Okay.
They found his head wrapped in a pair of trousers
Oh, my.
near the East 55th Street Bridge. And then they found his body like 1,500 feet away.
Oh, wow.
And it was completely naked
Oh.
and not mutilated at all.
Ah.
Which is strange because all the other victims were.
Yeah.
But he did have 6 very distinct tattoos.
Oh, wow.
And they were like Helen and Paul and WCG.
Wow.
And get this, it seems like he was decapitated while he was still alive.
Oh, my gosh.
And they had drained all the blood from his body.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, it's just horrifying.
Yeah. And they went to great lengths to try and identify him.
They even made a plaster cast of his face.
Wow.
And they made these diagrams of his tattoos.
Oh.
And they displayed all this at the Great Lakes Exposition.
Wow.
Over 100,000 people saw it.
Oh, wow.
And nobody could identify him.
He's still a John Doe.
Still a John Doe to this day.
So the discoveries just kept going for the next couple of
Yeah,
years.
it's just awful.
Hey,
One after another.
yeah, can you just kind of give us like a quick overview
Yes.
without going into all the gory details?
Yeah. It was basically more of the same. I mean,
Yeah.
more bodies, more decapitations,
Okay.
more dismemberment, signs of torture.
Right.
Like there was one in July of 36.
Okay.
They found him along Big Creek,
Okay.
and that's the only victim they ever found on the west side of the city.
Oh.
And then in August of 36, they found another one in Kingsbury Run.
Okay.
But this time they were really precise.
Oh.
Like they knew anatomy, you know,
Oh my God.
like a doctor or something.
Oh, that's really creepy.
Yeah. And then
Mhm.
in February of 37, they found a woman's torso washed up on shore.
Oh, wow.
And then in June of 37, they found the skeleton of a black woman under the Lorraine-Carnegie Bridge.
Okay.
And they think it was Rose Wallace,
Okay.
but they're not 100% sure.
Some more John Does.
Yeah.
So, and then the final two confirmed victims came in August of 38.
Right.
And that seemed especially brazen.
Oh, yeah. They found him at a dump site
Okay.
right across from Eliot Ness's office.
Wow.
Some of the body parts had even been refrigerated.
Oh my
It was like a message.
Like a taunt.
Yeah.
So, Eliot Ness, the guy who took down Al Capone,
Right. The Untouchables.
yeah, he got really involved in this case.
He became obsessed with it.
So what was his theory?
Well, he was convinced that the killer was this doctor, Francis E. Sweeney.
Okay.
He was a surgeon, and he had some mental health problems.
Okay.
And they say that Ness had him interrogated in secret.
Wow.
And the thing is, the murders did stop
Oh.
after Sweeney was committed to a mental institution.
Wow.
And then there were all these rumors about Ness getting taunting postcards from Sweeney.
Oh my
But
goodness.
nobody's ever been able to prove that.
Oh, wow.
And then there were always rumors, too, about some politically connected suspect.
Yeah.
But again, there's no real evidence to back that up.
So a lot of theories, but not a lot of answers.
That's right.
So Ness even did something pretty drastic with Kingsbury Run.
He was desperate to catch the killer.
Right.
So in 1938, he had all the shanty towns in Kingsbury Run burned down. I mean, can you imagine?
So he was trying to flush the killer out.
Yeah, that was the idea.
Wow.
But it meant that hundreds of people lost their homes.
Right.
And who knows how much evidence was destroyed in those fires.
Wow.
So it was really controversial.
Yeah. So even though this was all, decades ago, they're still working on identifying those remaining victims.
They are. And there's real hope now.
Tell me.
Well, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office,
Okay.
they've teamed up with this group called the DNA Doe Project.
Okay.
And they've actually started exhuming the unidentified victims,
Oh, wow.
like the tattooed man
Wow.
and the woman from the lakefront.
Okay.
And they're using genetic genealogy,
Okay.
which is basically comparing their DNA with huge public databases
Okay.
to try to find any relatives.
Wow. So they're hoping to give these folks back their names.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's amazing what they can do with technology these days.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So this really dark mystery is so tied to what was happening in Cleveland in the 1930s.
Yeah.
The Great Depression really created this perfect storm.
Right.
And people like Eliot Ness and their theories, they just keep the story alive.
Yeah.
And what the DNA Doe Project is doing is just so important,
Absolutely.
to give these people back their identities and their dignity.
That's the least we can do.
Yeah, so I guess the question that kind of comes to mind is, what happens when a society goes through such a tough time,
Yeah.
when people are really struggling?
Right.
What does that do to people, and,
Yeah.
and what kind of consequences can that have?
It's a question we should all think about.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because it could happen again.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.